Hi, my sweet friends, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. Sorry there. We're starting a new book today. We are reading Pinocchio. And we're starting with Chapter 1, How Master Cherry the Carpenter found a piece of wood that laughed and cried like a child. Once upon a time, there was a king, my little readers will instantly exclaim. No, children, you are mistaken. Once upon a time, there was a piece of wood. This wood was not valuable. It was only a common log, like those that are burnt in winter in the stoves and fireplaces to make a cheerful blaze and warm the rooms. I do not know how it came about, but one fine day this piece of wood was lying in the shop of an old carpenter of the name of Master Antonio. He was, however, called Master Cherry, on account of the end of his nose, which was always as red and polished as a ripe cherry. Excuse me here. No sooner had Master Cherry set eyes on the piece of wood than his face beamed with delight, and rubbing his hands together with satisfaction, he said to himself, "This wood has come at the right moment. It will just do to make the leg of a little table." Having said this, he immediately took a sharp axe with which to remove the bark and the rough surface. Just as he was going to give the first stroke, however, he remained with his arms suspended in the air, for he heard a very small voice saying imploringly, "Do not strike me so hard." Picture the astonishment of good old Master Cherry. He turned his terrified eyes all round the room to try and discover where the little voice could possibly have come from, but he saw nobody. He looked under the bench. Nobody. He looked into a cupboard that was always shut. Nobody. He looked into a basket of shavings and sawdust. Nobody. He even opened the door of the shop and gave a glance into the street, and still nobody. Who then could it be? "I see how it is," he said, laughing and scratching his wig. Evidently that little voice was all my imagination. Let us set to work again. And taking up the axe, he struck a tremendous blow on the piece of wood. "Oh, oh, you have hurt me," cried the same little voice dolefully. This time Master Cherry was petrified. His eyes started out of his head with fright, his mouth remained open, and his tongue hung out almost to the end of his chin like a mask on a fountain. As soon as he had recovered speech, he began to say, stuttering and trembling with fear, "But where on earth can that little voice have come from that said, 'Oh, oh'? Here there is certainly not a living soul. Is it possible that this piece of wood can cry and lament like a child? I cannot believe it. This piece of wood, here it is, a log for fuel like all the others, and thrown in the fire it would about suffice to boil a saucepan of beans. How then? Can anyone be hidden inside it? If anyone is hidden inside, so much the worse for him. I will settle him at once." So saying, he seized the poor piece of wood, and commenced beating it without mercy against the walls of the room. Then he stopped to listen, if he could hear any little voice lamenting. He waited 2 minutes. Nothing. 5 minutes. Nothing. 10 minutes. Still nothing. "I see how it is," he then said, forcing himself to laugh and pushing up his wig. "Evidently the little voice that said, 'Oh, oh,' was all my imagination. Let us set to work again." But as all the same he was in a great fright, he tried to sing himself to give himself a little courage. Putting the axe aside, he took his plane to plane and polish the bit of wood, but while he was running it up and down, he heard the same little voice say, laughing, "Have done! You are tickling me all over." This time poor Master Cherry fell down as if he had been struck by lightning. When he at last opened his eyes, he found himself seated on the floor. His face was quite changed. Even the end of his nose, instead of being crimson as it nearly always was, had become blue from fright. Chapter 2. Master Cherry makes a present of the piece of wood to his friend Geppetto, who takes it to make for himself a wonderful puppet. At that moment, someone knocked at the door. "Come in," said the carpenter, without having the strength to rise to his feet. A lively little old man walked into the shop. His name was Geppetto, but when the boys of the neighborhood wished to put him in a passion, they called him by the nickname of Polendina, Little Cornmeal Pudding, because his yellow wig greatly resembled a pudding made of Indian corn. Geppetto was very fiery. Woe to him, he called him Polendina. He became furious, and there was no holding him. "Good day, Master Antonio," said Geppetto. "What are you doing there on the floor?" "I am teaching the alphabet to the ants." "Much good may that do you." "What has brought you to me, neighbor Geppetto?" My legs. But to say the truth, Master Antonio, I am come to ask a favor of you. Here I am, ready to serve you, replied the carpenter, getting onto his knees. This morning an idea came into my head. Let us hear it. I thought I would make a beautiful wooden puppet, but a wonderful puppet that should know how to dance, to fence, and to leap like an acrobat. With this puppet, I would travel about the world to earn a piece of bread and a glass of wine. What do you think of it? Bravo, Polendina, exclaimed the same little voice, and it was impossible to say where it came from. Hearing himself called Polendina, Geppetto became as red as a turkey cock from rage, and turning to the carpenter, he said in a fury, Why do you insult me? Who insults you? You called me Polendina. It was not I. Would you have it then that it was I? It was you, I say. No. Yes. No. Yes. And becoming more and more angry, from words they came to blows, and flying at each other, they bit and fought and scratched manfully. When the fight was over, Master Antonio was in possession of Geppetto's yellow wig, and Geppetto discovered that the gray wig belonging to the carpenter had remained between his teeth. Give me back my wig, screamed Master Antonio, and you, return me mine, and let us make friends. The two old men, having each recovered his own wig, shook hands and swore that they would remain friends to the end of their lives. Well then, neighbor Geppetto, said the carpenter, to prove that peace was made, what is the favor that you wish of me? I want a little wood to make my puppet. Will you give me some? Master Antonio was delighted, and he immediately went to the bench and fetched the piece of wood that had caused him so much fear. But just as he was going to give it to his friend, the piece of wood gave a shake, and wriggling violently out of its hands, struck with all its force against the dried-up shins of poor Geppetto. Ah, is that the courteous way in which you make your presents, Master Antonio? You have almost lamed me. I swear to you that it was not I. Then you would have it that it was I? The wood is entirely to blame. I know that it was the wood, but it was you that hit my legs with it. I did not hit you with it. Liar! Geppetto, don't insult me, or I will call you Polendina. Ass, Polendina. Donkey, Polendina. Baboon, Polendina. On hearing himself called Polendina for the third time, Geppetto, blind with rage, fell upon the carpenter, and they fought desperately. When the battle was over, Master Antonio had 2 more scratches on his nose, and his adversary had 2 buttons too little on his waistcoat. Their accounts being thus squared, they shook hands and swore to remain good friends for the rest of their lives. Geppetto carried off his fine piece of wood, and thanking Master Antonio, returned limping to his house. Next chapter is Geppetto, having returned home, begins at once to make a puppet, to which he gives the name of Pinocchio. Geppetto lived in a small ground-floor room that was only lighted from the staircase. The furniture could not have been simpler. A bad chair, a poor bed, and a broken-down table. At the end of the room there was a fireplace with a lighted fire, but the fire was painted, and by the fire was a painted saucepan that was boiling cheerfully and sending out a cloud of smoke that looked exactly like real smoke. As soon as he reached home, Geppetto took his tools and set to work to cut out and model his puppet. What name shall I give him? He said to himself. I think I will call him Pinocchio. It is a name that will bring him luck. I once knew a whole family so called. There was Pinocchio the father, Pinocchia the mother, and Pinocchi the children, and all of them did well. The richest of them was a beggar. Having found a name for his puppet, he began to work in good earnest, and he first made his hair, then his forehead, and then his eyes. The eyes being finished, imagine his astonishment when he perceived that they moved and looked fixedly at him. Geppetto, seeing himself stared at by those 2 wooden eyes, took it almost in bad part, and said in an angry voice, Wicked wooden eyes, why do you look at me? No one answered. He then proceeded to carve the nose, but no sooner had he made it than it began to grow, and it grew, and grew, and grew, until in a few minutes it had become an immense nose that seemed as if it would never end. Poor Geppetto tired himself out with cutting it off, but the more he cut and shortened it, the longer did that impertinent nose become. The mouth was not even completed when it began to laugh and deride him. Stop laughing, said Geppetto, provoked, but he might as well have spoken to the wall. Stop laughing, I say, he roared in a threatening tone. The mouth then ceased laughing, but put out its tongue as far as it would go. Geppetto, not to spoil his handiwork, pretended not to see and continued his labors. After the mouth he fashioned the chin, then the throat, then the shoulders, the stomach, the arms, and the hands. The hands were scarcely finished when Geppetto felt his wig snatched from his head. He turned round, and what did he see? He saw his yellow wig in the puppet's hand. Pinocchio, give me back my wig instantly. But Pinocchio, instead of returning it, put it on his own head and was, in consequence, nearly smothered. Geppetto, at this insolent and derisive behavior, felt sadder and more melancholy than he ever had been in his life before, and turning to Pinocchio, he said to him, "You young rascal, you are not yet completed, and you are already beginning to show want of respect to your father. That is bad, my boy, very bad." And he dried a tear. The legs and the feet remained to be done. When Geppetto had finished the feet, he received a kick on the point of his nose. "I deserve it," he said to himself. "I should have thought of it sooner. Now it is too late." He then took the puppet under the arms and placed him on the floor to teach him to walk. Pinocchio's legs were stiff and he could not move, but Geppetto led him by the hand and showed him how to put one foot before the other. When his legs became flexible, Pinocchio began to walk by himself and to run about the room until, having gone out of the house door, he jumped into the street and escaped. Poor Geppetto rushed after him, but was not able to overtake him, for that rascal Pinocchio leapt in front of him like a hare, and knocking his wooden feet together against the pavement, made as much clatter as 20 pairs of peasants' clogs. "Stop him! Stop him!" shouted Geppetto. But the people in the street, seeing a wooden puppet running like a racehorse, stood still in astonishment to look at it, and laughed and laughed and laughed until it beats description. At last, as good luck would have it, a carabineer arrived who, hearing the uproar, imagined that a colt had escaped from his master. Planting himself courageously with his legs apart in the middle of the road, he waited with the determined purpose of stopping him, and thus preventing the chance of worse disasters. When Pinocchio, still at some distance, saw the carabineer barricading the whole street, he endeavored to take him by surprise and to pass between his legs, but he failed signally. The carabineer, without disturbing himself in the least, caught him cleverly by the nose. It was an immense nose of ridiculous proportions that seemed made on purpose to be laid hold of by carabineers, and consigned him to Geppetto. Wishing to punish him, Geppetto intended to pull his ears at once, but imagine his feelings when he could not succeed in finding them. And do you know the reason? It was that, in his hurry to model him, he had forgotten to make them. He then took him by the collar, and as he was leading him away, he said to him, shaking his head threateningly, "We will go home at once, and as soon as we arrive, we will regulate our accounts, never doubt it." At this announcement, Pinocchio threw himself on the ground and would not take another step. In the meanwhile, a crowd of idlers and inquisitive people began to assemble and to make a ring around them. Some of them said one thing, some another. "Poor puppet," said several. "He is right not to wish to return home. Who knows how Geppetto, that bad old man, will beat him?" And the others added maliciously, "Geppetto seems a good man, but with boys he is a regular tyrant. If that poor puppet is left in his hands, he is quite capable of tearing him in pieces." It ended in so much being said and done that the carabineer at last set Pinocchio at liberty and conducted Geppetto to prison. The poor man, not being ready with words to defend himself, cried like a calf, and as he was being led away to prison, sobbed out, "Wretched boy, and to think how I have labored to make him a well-conducted puppet. But it serves me right. I should have thought of it sooner." What happens afterwards is a story that really is past all belief, but I will relate it to you in the following chapters. The next chapter, the story of Pinocchio and the talking cricket, from which we see that naughty boys cannot endure to be corrected by those who know more than they do. Well then, children, I must tell you that whilst poor Geppetto was being taken to prison for no fault of his, that imp Pinocchio, finding himself free from the clutches of the carabineer, ran off as fast as his legs could carry him. That he might reach home the quicker, he rushed across the fields, and in his mad hurry, he jumped high banks, thorn hedges, and ditches full of water, exactly as a kid or a leveret would have done if pursued by hunters. Having arrived at the house, he found the street door ajar. He pushed it open, went in, and having secured the latch, threw himself seated on the ground and gave a great sigh of satisfaction. But his satisfaction did not last long, for he heard someone in the room who was saying, "Creak, creak, creak." "Who calls me?" said Pinocchio in a fright. "It is I." Pinocchio turned round and saw a big cricket crawling slowly up the wall. "Tell me, cricket, who may you be?" "I am the talking cricket, and I have lived in this room 100 years and more." "Now, however, this room is mine," said the puppet, "and if you would do me a pleasure, go away at once, without even turning round." "I will not go," answered the cricket, "until I have told you a great truth." "Tell it me then, and be quick about it." "Woe to those boys who rebel against their parents and run away capriciously from home. They will never come to any good in the world, and sooner or later they will repent bitterly." Sing away, Cricket, as you please, and as long as you please. For me, I have made up my mind to run away tomorrow at daybreak, because if I remain, I shall not escape the fate of all other boys. I shall be sent to school, and shall be made to study either by love or by force. To tell you in confidence, I have no wish to learn. It is much more amusing to run after butterflies or to climb trees, and to take the young birds out of their nests. Poor little goose! But do you not know that in that way you will grow up a perfect donkey, and that everyone will make game of you? Hold your tongue, you wicked, ill-omened croaker, shouted Pinocchio. But the cricket, who was patient and philosophical, instead of becoming angry at this impertinence, continued in the same tone. But if you do not wish to go to school, why not at least learn a trade, if only to enable you to earn honestly a piece of bread? Do you want me to tell you? Replied Pinocchio, who was beginning to lose patience. Amongst all the trades in the world, there is only one that really takes my fancy. And that trade, what is it? It is to eat, drink, sleep, and amuse myself, and to lead a vagabond life from morning to night. As a rule, said the talking cricket with the same composure, all those who follow that trade end almost always either in a hospital or in prison. Take care, you wicked, ill-omened croaker. Woe to you if I fly into a passion. Poor Pinocchio, I really pity you. Why do you pity me? Because you are a puppet, and what is worse, because you have a wooden head. At these last words, Pinocchio jumped up in a rage, and snatching a wooden hammer from the bench, he threw it at the talking cricket. Perhaps he never meant to hit him, but unfortunately it struck him exactly on the head, so that the poor cricket had scarcely breath to cry cree, 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 and then he remained dried up and flattened against the wall. Next chapter. Pinocchio is hungry and searches for an egg to make himself an omelet, but just at the most interesting moment the omelet flies out of the window. Night was coming on, and Pinocchio, remembering that he had eaten nothing all day, began to feel a gnawing in his stomach that very much resembled appetite. But appetite with boys travels quickly, and in fact, after a few minutes, his appetite had become hunger, and in no time his hunger became ravenous, a hunger that was really quite insupportable. Poor Pinocchio ran quickly to the fireplace where a saucepan was boiling and was going to take off the lid to see what was in it. But the saucepan was only painted on the wall. You can imagine his feelings. His nose, which was already long, became longer by at least 3 fingers. He then began to run around the room, searching in the drawers and in every imaginable place, in hopes of finding a bit of bread. If it was only a bit of dry bread, a crust, a bone left by a dog, a little moldy pudding of Indian corn, a fish bone, a cherry stone, in fact anything that he could gnaw. But he could find nothing, nothing at all, absolutely nothing. And in the meanwhile, his hunger grew and grew, and poor Pinocchio had no other relief than yawning, and his yawns were so tremendous that sometimes his mouth almost reached his ears. And after he had yawned, he spluttered and felt as if he was going to faint. Then he began to cry desperately, and he said, "The talking cricket was right. I did wrong to rebel against my papa and to run away from home. If my papa was here, I should not now be dying of yawning. Oh, what a dreadful illness hunger is!" Just then he thought he saw something in the dust heap, something round and white that looked like a hen's egg. To give a spring and seize hold of it was the affair of a moment. It was indeed an egg. Pinocchio's joy beats description. It can only be imagined. Almost believing it must be a dream, he kept turning the egg over in his hands, feeling it and kissing it, and as he kissed it, he said, "And now, how shall I cook it? Shall I make an omelet? No, it would be better to cook it in a saucer. Or would it not be more savory to fry it in the frying pan? Or shall I simply boil it? No, the quickest way of all is to cook it in a saucer. I am in such a hurry to eat it." Without loss of time, he placed an earthenware saucer on a brazier full of red-hot embers. Into the saucer, instead of oil or butter, he poured a little water, and when the water began to smoke, tack, he broke the eggshell over it, that the contents might drop in. But instead of the white and the yolk, a little chicken popped out, very gay and polite. Making a beautiful curtsy, it said to him, "1,000 thanks, Master Pinocchio, for saving me the trouble of breaking the shell. Adieu until we meet again. Keep well, and my best compliments to all at home." Thus saying, it spread its wings, darted through the open window, and flying away was lost to sight. The poor puppet stood as if he had been bewitched, with his eyes fixed, his mouth open, and the eggshell in his hand. Recovering, however, from his first stupefaction, he began to cry and scream and to stamp his feet on the floor in desperation, and amidst his sobs he said, "Ah, indeed, the talking cricket was right. If I had not run away from home, and if my papa was here, I should not now be dying of hunger. Oh, what a dreadful illness hunger is!" And as his stomach cried out more than ever, and he did not know how to quiet it, he thought he would leave the house and make an excursion in the neighborhood in hopes of finding some charitable person who would give him a piece of bread. We'll stop there and start with the next chapter the next time. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.